I still despise my husband's ex-girlfriend for coming after my husband 10 years ago. I met the woman who came after my husband 10 years ago and I'm struggling. This is really long. Sorry, I just need to get this off my chest. My husband and I have been married for 20 years. Around year 8 or 9, we fell into a bit of a rut as many couples do. We had 2 young children, our life wasn't very active, there was a bit of resentment bubbling on each side and it was just generally not a great time in our marriage. I personally was struggling with my body image as it had changed in many ways after my pregnancies and didn't feel the least bit desirable. At some point during that time, an ex-girlfriend from high school reached out to my husband via Facebook. She said she was curious about how he was doing and wanted to catch up. He asked me if I was comfortable with that, and even though it gave me pause, I didn't want to be a nagging, jealous wife just because I was feeling bad about myself. I said it was fine. During their early conversations, she told him that her husband was battling brain cancer and had started treating her badly. My husband felt bad for her, so he was happy to be a place for her to vent. After a few weeks, the conversation started getting longer and occurring later at night. I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, but I was still relatively young and hadn't learned to set boundaries yet, so I didn't say anything. Dumb, I know. The conversations then turned to the nostalgia of high school. She told him he was her first real love, he took her virginity, there would always be a place for him in her heart. While he continued the conversation, he never fed into the very obvious trap she was setting, but it still killed me. I know this because they were also texting, and at the time we had a joint Facebook account and he thought archiving the messages would keep me from seeing them. Yes, we were that couple. Cringe. One night, I had gotten the kids to bed early and asked my husband if he wanted to come to bed with me. I will say that I absolutely could have been more than explicit with my invitation, letting him know I wanted to do more than sleep, but it is what it is. He said he wasn't ready for bed and wanted to watch the basketball game. However, 10 minutes later his phone rang and it was her. They stayed on the phone for nearly 45 minutes and I was so hurt. In my brain, he didn't want me because who would, with the way I looked? What hurt me the most is that while I was unsuccessfully trying to nurture our relationship, he chose to give his time to her. When he got off the phone and came to our room, I exploded and he said I was too much and he was going to sleep in the office for a few nights. During those 3 or 4 days, we didn't speak to each other unless it was about the kids, but every night he was in the phone with her. We had a very small house with very thin walls. You could hear everything. The following Saturday morning, I returned from the store and he said, "So, do you want me to stop talking to X? Is that what this is all about?" Cue another head explosion and another argument. I asked him why he was trying to hide the messages and he said he knew how I was going to react to them. We went round and round, but in the end, he agreed to stop talking to her, we both agreed to couples counseling, and I agreed to seek individual therapy for my personal issues. We've gotten past it and we are now stronger than ever, and I've forgiven my husband for his part and hold no resentment against him for it. For context, we live in smallish town just outside of a big city. A lot of people somehow end up back here when they start having families, just as we did, so we still socialize with a number of friends from my husband's high school. We didn't go to the same school even though we lived in the same town. Many of the high school friends also know this woman and occasionally see her in town. Last year, one of these mutual friends told us that she ended up leaving her husband when his cancer came back for a different ex-boyfriend from high school. That was all the confirmation I needed to tell me that I was right about her intentions back then. All I said was, "Huh," as in, go figure, and my husband and I shared a look and he could see that I knew I was right all those years ago, and I could see by his face that he was quietly acknowledging it. Anyways, I thought I was completely over it. It's been over a decade since, but I met her last week and I was shocked at how much I despise her. We went to a high school friend's 40th birthday. She immediately approached us after we walked in, said hi to my husband and introduced herself to me, although I already knew who she was. I'm typically a very outgoing, bubbly person, but I found myself acting so towards her while simultaneously telling myself that this was my friend's party, my kids were there and to behave. We only spoke for about 5 minutes, but I never once smiled. I shook her hand as if it was covered in germs and didn't want to contaminate myself and kept a very dry, short tone. It was as if this part of me that I didn't know existed took over for a moment, and I was almost powerless to stop it. When we got home from the party, I told my husband what happened and how it made me feel, and he was quite shocked. He didn't realize I was capable of disliking someone as much as I despise her. He also apologized again for his part in causing me to feel that way back then and assured me that while he was naive and didn't see what she was trying to do, even if she had come on very strong, he wouldn't have ever considered it because I am it for him and always have been. I really wanted to sit with it to try and understand my feelings, and it turns out there's still a lot there. She disrespected me, my family, my marriage, and I kinda feel my very existence because my family is what I live for. I don't know that I'll ever forgive her for actively trying to destroy my family. The biggest takeaway for me is that I haven't forgiven myself for the role I played in it. I'm ashamed of myself that I was who I was and how I was back then. I know that my behavior is partly to blame for the fact that he was comfortable with nurturing a deep, friendly relationship with her while his wife was yearning for that same affection at best or at worst, that he could have easily cheated if he wasn't the amazing man he is. I was just too dumb and insecure to recognize it back then. I realize how lucky I am to have the husband I do and to have the relationship that we do. Even after 20 years, we are still very much in love. But I can't help but feel so stupid for having such strong feelings against her, and it has caused me to feel a bit insecure even though I know without a shadow of a doubt that I have nothing to worry about, and then I feel like an idiot again. From the comments, I'm just gonna be the one to point out your husband could easily have cheated. He didn't end that friendship on his own. That was you. You don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stood your ground. What I'm saying is your anger is misplaced. This woman doesn't know you or your values or how much your family means to you. Your amazing man of a husband absolutely knows and chose to disrespect you until you had 2 fights and tons of counseling about it. OP, with regards to my husband's role in it, you're right, but you have to remember that I am writing this post over a decade after the initial incident occurred. He isn't the same person he was back then. My husband as he is today is truly the best man I know. With regard to that woman, she knew what she was doing. My husband and I had a joint Facebook account, cringy, I know, and she used Facebook to reach out to him. She saw all of our family photos. She knew what she was doing and didn't care about the damage she could have caused. Were my husband's actions back then right? No, but we worked through it. He's apologized and has never done anything like that since. The way I see it, she was a sneaky bitch who knowingly went after a married man. And again, I know I was right about her because of what she did later when she went after another of her exes from high school. He wasn't married, but he was engaged to his long-term partner when they started up again. There's a special place in H for women like her, in my very humble opinion. Story 2, I'm divorcing my husband after 2 days for his prank at our wedding. It has been 2 days since my wedding day. I had already been with him for 4 years, 1 year of which I was engaged. It all started a few months earlier when I noticed my husband Jake watching prank videos. Among other things, these videos showed embarrassing photos of the bride being played on a projector in front of the whole room, or the bride's face being smashed into the cake. I told him straight away that I didn't want anything like that at our wedding. He just laughed and said that he wasn't planning anything like that. I thought that was the end of it, but I kept catching him making strange arrangements with his friends. He suddenly wanted to choose the wedding photographer and the cake. I thought nothing of it and was just glad that he was helping me with the wedding preparations. Nevertheless, I reminded him the day before that if he did something like that, I would break up with him immediately. When the day of the wedding came, everything went smoothly until the ceremony, until the moment came when the cake was to be cut. The whole room watched as I made the first cut and the photographer stood in front of us with camera in hand. Suddenly I felt a hand on the back of my head pushing me face first into the cake. Not only my makeup but the whole wedding dress was ruined and the whole room laughed, my husband the loudest. At that moment the photographer took the photo and Jake said that this was now our wedding photo. I turned around, slapped him in the face and ran out of the room in tears. Thank God karma didn't take long to arrive and came in the form of his own brother. I ran to the toilet and started crying when I suddenly heard loud shouting from the hall. It was his brother Frank. I could barely understand what he was saying, and when I left the toilet he was waiting for me. He told me that Jake had something to tell me. Jake was shaking and apologized without looking me in the eye. Frank told him to look me in the eye and apologize again. Even I was a bit scared of Frank at that moment, because I had always thought of him as a kind and gentle man. I had never seen him angry before. Jake apologized again and then Frank led us back into the hall, which was suddenly very quiet, and most of our families looked down at the floor a little embarrassed. The festivities were cut short and I was taken home by Frank because I was too angry with my husband and I didn't want to see him. During the ride, Frank apologized for blowing up like that. He explained that my husband was horrible even back when he was a brother and used every special occasion to humiliate Frank. When it was Frank's birthday, my husband would throw his cake at him and break his presents. But back then, their parents always brushed it all off by saying that that's just how brothers behave. So he had to endure every humiliation. But when he saw my husband bury my face in the cake, he was fed up because he realized that my husband was just a bad person who got his satisfaction from humiliating others. I asked Frank if he thought it would be an exaggeration if I separated from my husband, and he said no, because according to him I deserved better and he didn't care how his brother felt about it because he had brought it on himself. Then he told me that if I needed help collecting my things he would help me and gave me his number. And I decided to separate from him and file for divorce and informed Jake and my family about it. Jake just told me not to do that because it was just a harmless prank. I was spammed by both his family and mine that it would be ridiculous to end our marriage over this. But I see it differently. If he does something like this to me despite multiple requests not to do it even after promising he wouldn't do it, then I can't trust him. No matter what he promises me, I have to assume that the opposite can and will happen, and that he doesn't care at all how I feel about his decisions. This situation can be projected onto so many much worse situations where it would be important for me to be able to trust him. His brother Frank seems to be the only one who supports me now, and I will go through with the divorce. Call me humorless, call me what you want, but I have given my reasons.